Mexico in 1968 was considerably different in some ways than Brazil of today. It was a time worldwide, seemingly, of student uprisings, of culture changes, and Mexico had had an incident at a local private school where students were involved in a melee, and the police, came in, and there was a lockdown. And this was going on at the same time as the Olympics were ratcheting up for being held in Mexico that particular year of 1968. And in the midst of these uprisings, university students became active politically and were fighting against local police forces. And there was a massacre right in this same time of Olympic attention. And it might have gone really unnoticed internationally were it not for the fact that Black Power movement was being exhibited in the actual Mexico Olympics itself, where two of the American athletes stood in a Black Power salute, aided by an international participant who had nothing to do with it, but felt solidarity with the two other athletes. It was a time that had international attention and international scrutiny, where Mexico might have been able to get away with a massacre of hundreds, if not thousands, because many were probably unreported at that time. With Brazil today, I see much more of an economic situation going on. While both Mexico City and more than one of the major cities of Brazil are considered mega cities today. We like to think about Mexico City as having more people than, say, all of Canada put together in the Valley of Mexico. It's pretty staggering. And while both of these areas of mega city, whether in Mexico or in Brazil, have extreme poverty conditions and shanty towns and lack of economic infrastructure and lack of education and political problems, Mexico's problems don't seem to have the same level of just sheer, dominance by political parties that Brazil does. And if I'm looking at the current situation right now with the Olympics in Brazil, the undercurrent is that so much money was put towards the Olympics in Brazil that at the last minute they siphoned money away from health care, from education, and in order to make this occur. When I think about it from the perspective of history, I can pull books off my shelves from the 1950s and 60s, from the favelas in Brazil, the slums, the shanty towns, and we have charismatic writers from that period talking about the poverty, the lack of food, the dirt, the lack of hygiene, and the politicians coming in just when they needed votes to shuffle people out and give them a couple of handouts here and there, and then life would go back to normal. I don't see much difference with those Brazilian slums then as here we are decades later now. It's still the pomp and circumstance of Olympics are coming, all of this great money and all this revenue is going to go back to the people of Brazil. I don't see any of that trickle-down effect happening. It's a little unfortunate that the president is now being, possibly checked out for impeachment and all of that aside. But that situation for Brazil, fortunately, is not coming in the time of political violence and dictatorship that Brazil had in the 60s and 70s. So in some ways, I can see both situations of lesser developed nations, or what we used to call third world countries, hoping to gain international prestige and tourism and dollars coming in through having the Olympics. And I see both areas, 1968 Mexico, 2016 Brazil, as having governments that are strong-powered, strong-handed, small elite at the top and not really getting the benefits to the people at the bottom. And so, yeah, that's there. There are racial disparities. There are issues of proximity to the United States, or in Brazil's case, more the proximity to European nations in some cases. But other than that, the timing is so different. The culture wars of the 1960s that affected Mexico are not there for the situation right now for Brazil. And we might even be able to see that through Brazil's handling of its opening ceremonies, where the focus was the environment and a whole sort of world view of what's shaping us right now. Also, when we think about the influence of the United States in Mexico's Olympic Games, yes, Americans are certainly winning gold medals and silver medals and on, and that's wonderful. But there isn't the cultural impact and the significance of Americans in that particular games, like the Black Power salute and that influence that happened in the Mexico 1968 Games. Likewise, for Brazil, I think that the current situation is just an example of what is going to continue to grow in Brazil. It's an economic downward spiral that the Olympics is just highlighting right now, and very sadly for Brazil, being the largest physical space nation for the entirety of Latin America, and certainly a hugely populous nation, it's going to have economic ramifications throughout the Southern Cone and probably the rest of Latin America as well. And we do quite a lot of trade with Brazil, whether for soybeans, coffee, you name it. There will be other ramifications for us as well. A little bit dire, but I can see why we would want to look at the two larger countries of Latin America together, being that there have been so few Olympic Games that go outside of particular regions of the world, and these two Latin American ones make sense to compare. But the timing of history made Mexico's case rather unique, and I can say the times that I've driven through Mexico City and seen and stopped at what had been the Olympic stadiums and look at the soccer parks, there's still immense pride in Mexico about those games, and still a lot of hush about what happened with the violence at the same time. I hope that we have a better legacy for what remains of Brazil's Olympic experience.